to panel 2, where we are going to focus on energy security. Energy security, the new game in town, which means REPowerEU, which means the European Commission. Mechthild Wörsdörfer.
Thank you, Giles, for this nice introduction.
Deputy Director General, DG Energy. Tell us about your REPowerEU plan.
Okay. REPowerEU is about energy security, but it's also about clean energy transitions and diversifying of our gas supplies or reducing our imports from Russian fossil fuels. The European Council just concluded, and one of the big topics here was energy. Not only the sanctions, but also the part on energy prices, infrastructure, and how to accelerate clean energy transition. And we strongly believe that this goes hand in hand. When we look at REPowerEU, which we published last week, based on a number of preparatory work and discussions at European Council level, we look at savings and energy efficiency first. We look at short-term diversification and a joint platform on gas. And we look at, thirdly, and most importantly, clean energy transition. Speed up, accelerate renewables, look at hydrogen, the topic of today, look at heat pumps, look at biogases and biomethane, look at all possible ways to reduce our dependence on fossil fuels and to reduce the imports of Russian gas by 2/3 this year. And this was generally welcome in the European Council and will be further discussed in the Energy Council and others. We also propose very concretely, based on new updated studies which take into account the high energy prices and the uncertainty and the reduction of import dependence. So new modeling, new scenarios, which brings us for renewables that we propose a target for 2030 from 40 to 45%. Those who have a bit of historical memory, we started proposing 32% for 2030 a few years ago. Then last year we proposed 40% and a few days ago 45%. So you see the focus and the acceleration brought in by the European Green Deal, by the Fit for 55, but now by REPower, because we are in a crisis situation. I think that everyone understood, definitely in the energy world, it's more broadly the geopolitical world, but in the energy world, it's really another speed, it's another transition, it's the acceleration. So for renewables, we propose 45%, and for energy efficiency, 13%. This means also the question how to, because the target setting, I think, is good for industry, for predictability. We have also specific numbers for biomethane, biogas, and for hydrogen. I come back in a minute on that. But we have an overall proposal for 45% renewables. But how to do it? We also identified one of the key obstacles, which is permitting processes. Let me take an example from the wind industry. Onshore wind, it takes between 4 and 8 years in Europe. Solar is a bit shorter, 1 to 4 years, depending on the countries. But there are good examples, best practices, which we have published last week in what we call a guidance document and a recommendation. And I really think there is a lot of good work, a lot of good practice done by industry and member states where we can learn from each other. Because it's easy to blame EU legislation, environmental legislation. But if in one country or region you can do it in 1 year and the other one it takes 6 or 7 years, there's also a national or other factors which come in, which slows down this permitting. So we are proposing this recommendation and guidance, but we also propose an amendment to our Renewables Directive, meaning that we want to go and give renewables an overriding public interest status, and, which is new, at least at EU level, we want that member states define so-called go-to areas, which are particularly suitable for either wind or solar for renewables, and where we hope to get, with simplified procedures and one environmental impact assessment, but not project by project, a really shorter and acceleration of permitting. And I think this is one key element to note from the REPowerEU, which we are now discussing with Parliament and Council. The topic today is hydrogen, and obviously this is well covered also in the REPowerEU. We need renewable hydrogen. We speak about a hydrogen accelerator from now on till 2030. So we had 2 years ago an EU hydrogen strategy. We know many member states and companies are working on hydrogen, but we have proposed now 10 million tons on EU production and 10 million tons of imported hydrogen, renewable hydrogen. So these are the new, very ambitious figures, and I'm curious to hear more also from industry and other players here on how can we commonly do it and make it happen. So we have the hydrogen accelerator. We are looking at imported and own EU production of renewable hydrogen. We have a framework, which we are right now discussing with the Renewables Directive. We published also last week a delegated act on renewable hydrogen. And we also have a framework which we call decarbonization of gas and hydrogen, which we published last year. So all together, we want to make the hydrogen market, the renewable hydrogen market, a priority, scale up as much as possible to have these ambitious targets achieved in 2030, together with industry, together with member states. So this is something we are focusing on. We have also, because we are convinced that we need a lot more renewables and accelerate, as I said, but there might not be enough renewables within Europe to produce the target of renewable hydrogen. So we are also looking at partnerships with third countries. And here in our REPowerEU, we mention the Mediterranean. We mention Ukraine once the war is over. And we mention the third part is North Sea. Thank you. You read well our REPower. So these three regions are the focus. It's not the only ones, but with those we want to conclude partnerships, and I think that could be mutually beneficial because first of all, we don't have in the EU probably enough renewables for the demand and the needs for renewable hydrogen, in particular in energy intensive, but also in other areas. And we can also work with those third parties that they do decarbonization of their energy mix. So it's, in a way, a partnership in both ways. So these three areas we are focusing on, but we are looking also, for example, on Chile, which has a high potential of renewable hydrogen, or other areas even more far away. So the focus of our REPower is really accelerate clean energy transition. There are enough also short-term action which we need to do in order to look at this very difficult crisis situation we are right now, to be prepared, to diversify, to have a platform on joint gas purchasing, to fill our storages. But the topic of today, I think, is more the side that we would, in addition to that, short-term measures to really look how to accelerate renewables, how to accelerate renewable hydrogen, and then also medium, long-term, obviously, to reach our 2030, 2040, 2050 targets together with our member states. And I stop here and looking forward to the discussion.
Thank you very much, Mechthild. Panelists, Mechthild wants to know how you can collectively deliver on this very ambitious REPowerEU plan. Sven Utermöhlen, CEO of Offshore Wind in RWE Renewables. Mechthild said that Europe might not be able to produce enough renewables in the EU to meet the new renewable hydrogen targets. Of course, the renewable hydrogen is only one part of it, one small part of it. There's then all the renewable electrons we need for the electricity system, a far bigger quantity of renewable electrons, of course. Question, Sven, will Europe be able to produce all of the renewable electrons that we need?
Yeah, very good point. And as you already said, Giles, let's keep in mind, we want to increase wind power to 480 gigawatts by 2030 from around 190 where we are today. which we have built over the last 20 years. And now in the remaining 8 or 7.5, we want to bring it to 480. So that's a tremendous task. I would still say we should not say that we cannot produce these electrons that we need. I think we can. But in order to do that, we need to, which you already said, Mechthild, we need to accelerate. And acceleration means we need to talk about permitting. I think there are very good measures in the REPowerEU and in the guideline that you published. We also need to make sure that in terms of the maritime and land spatial planning, that we really make the sites available, that we really dedicate those sites. Again, a lot of very good points made there. But also, we need to think about how we accelerate and optimize, and I now turn to green hydrogen in particular, the linkage between the production of the green electrons, i.e. the green power, and how we best and in a most effective way turn that into green hydrogen. And I want to make one example which would be very important if we look at the potential of the North Sea. If you look at offshore wind production, especially when it is very far from shore, there is actually a very good case to think about transporting producing the hydrogen offshore, where the wind farm is going to be installed, and then transporting the green hydrogen via pipeline to shore. Why is that beneficial? I'll just give you one key number or metric to keep in mind. For 10 gigawatts of installed capacity, you can transport green hydrogen from those 10 gigawatts through one pipeline to the shore. You would need 5 high voltage cables for that. And it saves, we just did a study for that, it saves around 6 billion euros on that 10 gigawatt scale if you do it with one pipeline instead of 5 cables. Plus, it accelerates the whole process because the building of the 5 cables also takes a lot of time. Permitting again comes into play. And it's also environmentally more friendly because one pipeline instead of 5 cable routes obviously is also beneficial. So this is one of the things that can be done. Let me be very clear. I'm not saying all hydrogen has to be transported, from the place of where the wind farm is. Obviously, we need the green power to be fed into the grid, and then we should have a lot of flexibility to put the electrolyzers where the electrolyzers are needed onshore. But in the very specific case of offshore, there is a lot of sense in thinking about producing it offshore and bringing it to shore with a pipeline.
Thank you, Sven. Catherine Sheridan, Chief Operating Officer of EIH2. Your organization is doing precisely this. Offshore wind in Ireland, in your case, to hydrogen. Tell us about it.
Thanks, Giles. And first of all, thanks to everybody for inviting me here today, and thanks very much for REPowerEU. Our planet is burning, and I think it's really important that we just, keep that in mind as we're going along. Everything we're doing in relation to REPowerEU has multiple reasons that we need it, because we're using the systems thinking. We need to approach energy security, we need to consider the affordability, but we also need to make sure that we're having a whole of system approach that gets us to the end point of 2050, where we have a net zero continent. So what does that look like? It's going to have 2 forms of energy. It's going to have renewable electrons, and it's going to have a zero carbon gas, a fuel, and that's going to be green hydrogen. So in Ireland, as a proud member of the European Union, we have a lot of wind. If anyone's gone on holidays in Ireland, it's not really somewhere you go for the sun, but we do have a lot of wind. So we have a natural resource, and this gives us an opportunity to play a significant role in repurposing the geopolitics and the energy map of the world, because we can be one of the sources of European energy, and we have a complementary energy system in Ireland. We have a lot of wind, but we don't have a lot of indigenous need for that energy. So we are looking to have an opportunity to export our natural resource, our wind, to Europe. To do that, we need to create a hydrogen economy within Ireland. So EIH2 are looking to be Ireland's first green hydrogen production company. we're looking at a number of small local sites with the local solutions, so co-locating with an onshore wind farm, co-locating with an industry. But ultimately, what we would like to do is create hydrogen valleys along the west coast of Ireland, where we partner up with either utilities and industry and also wind farms, so that we can bring those electrons ashore, put as many of them as we can onto our system, but then the excess that we have in Ireland, we can take it and we can support Europe. That's our main drive. So we've got our end goal in mind, and everything we're doing is to get us to there.
And how will you transport the hydrogen to the rest of Europe?
So there's a couple of options that you would think of. In the first instance, you'd think of using ammonia and shipping. That's one option. And also, if we can have green ammonia produced in Ireland and we can bring it to somewhere that's going to use that to create the fertilizer that we need, I think food security in Europe is becoming really important. But then there's also the option of the pipelines, because that has the inherent storage located in it, and it provides us with that indigenous store of energy that we're going to need around Europe. So depending on how Ireland's hydrogen policy evolves, which we'll come back to later because we don't have one presently, that'll kind of give us more information about how we should develop.
So only a very small proportion of the production would be consumed in Ireland.
We don't have, we've got a need of maybe about 10 gigawatts, but we've got a potential of about 80. So it's like in the case of, in the Middle East, if somebody said, do you know what, lads, I'll only take enough oil for myself, and then we leave the rest of it in the ground. No, we want to play our part, and we want to be a good part of the European story, because energy system integration isn't just about how gas and electricity work together. It's about how we as public and private and academic and industry and different nations work together to create a really integrated system.
Thank you very much. Kjell Bjørnsen, Chief Financial Officer of Nel, the leading electrolyzer manufacturer. Catherine, Sven, Miguel as well. They're going to need a lot of electrolyzers. How many are you going to be able to manufacture every year, and by when?
So what we have said, and we've said that for some time now, is that we will be able to scale up as much as the market needs. Let me just give some background and content on that. Now, the only place that green hydrogen at scale has happened is in Norway. That was in last century. We have that history with us. What built that is our background, and then we were so lucky to recapitalize the company before this whole interest in hydrogen started, so we could snatch up the one competitor we feared the most in the US, based on the PEM technology platform. We have now spent years really perfecting the technology, taking out any reliance on platinum group metals or other things that are problematic from a supply chain perspective, and then we worked step by step through the manufacturing process and said, how does an industrial line look? And the first one we started at the end of last year, officially opened just recently, it's 500 megawatt. So that's 5 times the global market in 2019 or 2020 on one line. Is that enough? No, but now we have the blueprint, we know how to do it. So this is what we can do elsewhere. We're also doing the same on the PEM technology, and that is most likely the technology that will be needed for your offshore wind installations, because alkaline is a bit too big and bulky to put into a windmill, but it's perfect for onshore. So yes, we're definitely ready, and with a technology platform that's proven and ready to scale.
And what volume of electrolyzers do you hope to be manufacturing in Europe by 2025?
We have said that we need to be ready to produce at least 4 gigawatt. And then we look at that target on a regular basis and see what we actually will be producing. Because even if we invest a lot ahead of the curve, we built an organization 5 times the size for what we would need for current volumes, just to drive the development going forward. We burn a lot of cash. So we won't be building capacity before we need it. We will be building when it is needed by the market.
You co-signed that declaration on the 5th of May of all the
Yes.
European electrolyzer manufacturers. What are the numbers in that?
That was, I believe, 25 in total for the industry. So, of course, if we are to meet that, we need to up our own target, because we definitely want to keep our 20% market share.
That was 25 gigawatts a year by 2025.
Yeah.
And at the moment, the Europe-wide manufacturing capacity is about 1.75 gigawatts a year?
Well, depends on how you count, So when we had opening, we had the day after we had an investor and analyst day. And a lot of the analysts were surprised because they saw one line, pumping out lots of electrolyzers and 4 people manning the line. And at some competitors, you see people with screwdrivers. So if you have a big empty building and the potential to put a lot of people in there, you can have a lot of capacity. We believe the future is to have highly skilled, well-trained operators running standard automated processes like you would do in any other industry. This is like any other industry in the end, and that's what we've set the blueprint up for doing, so now it's copy-paste.
In a minute, Kjell Christian, I'm going to ask you about the cost of your electrolyzers. We'll give you a rest for a moment. Miguel Stilwell, Chief Executive Officer of EDP. Tell us about what EDP is doing on renewable hydrogen.
Well, we've set out pretty ambitious targets in terms of what we develop in terms of the hydrogen, but it's built very much on the fact that we are primarily a renewable energy player. I mean, we're the second largest listed renewable energy company worldwide. We have 14 gigawatts under management, both wind and increasingly in solar, and we're present in 28 different geographies. I think we've been building this out over the last 20 years, so we are very much a renewable company. When we see hydrogen and we see that 70% of the cost of actually producing it is renewables, we think that there's a good opportunity either to do it ourselves or to partner up with those technology companies and with those industrials that do need it. So we are very much in it, coming from the side of renewables. We do see, let's say, the opportunity there. We can also talk about many of the challenges, not only on the renewable side, but also on the hydrogen side, because I think there are many challenges there. But I think globally what we see is we believe very much in the energy transition. We are fully committed to being 100% green, so by 2030. Coming from, let's say, a traditional integrated utility, so shutting down all of our coal by 2025. We're already 75% renewable generation as of today on an integrated basis, but as I say, moving to 100%. Now, I don't know if you want me to get into the specifics, but
please.
This is a huge uphill challenge because Europe, even before the war, even before the REPower, should have already been investing 3 times in renewables what it was investing. So we're not to reach the 55 and the 2030 targets. We're now increasing those targets. So first, congratulate the European Commission. I'm a deep supporter of the European Commission and everything that they're doing. I think really important steps that are being done there. I think the challenge is now much more how we bring that down to the national level, and I'd say to the local level. Because quite frankly, when we're on the ground and we're building projects, many times, people know the targets, they know the overall targets. Even at the national level, many times they have sort of the national plans until 2030. But when you get down to the local mayor or you get down to the local community, and that's where you start getting sometimes the opposition. And so I think one of the key points which was decided recently, which was to, let's say, invert the burden of proof and essentially consider it a public service or a public asset or a security asset, renewables, I think is going to be key. We need to see how that's transposed to the national, to the different countries, and how that translates into specifics on the ground to see if it really will accelerate. But if we don't get that part right, if we can't accelerate the renewables part, it will be very difficult to do the renewable hydrogen part. Because at the end of the day, these two are completely tied together, and if you can't do one, you can't do the other. So we definitely need to accelerate. We definitely need to simplify the permitting. I congratulate the European Commission, but there's still a lot of work to be done on the ground to get this done. And I completely agree. There are countries that are doing this fairly well, but many of them have issues in terms of the permitting, the licensing, the interconnection. Many times is a bottleneck. I would challenge sometimes to look at what are the incentives for some of the network operators. Do they have the right incentives to actually provide interconnection? Because, as I say, the message from the ground is we need to be doing it a lot faster. And
Kjell Christian, all these electrolyzers you're going to be manufacturing for Miguel, Catherine, Sven, will they be affordable?
They will be when we get to the right volume, And this is, we have had some brave customers earlier here today in the panel. And I say brave and forward-leaning because they take the development cost of being the first. No. So the first one that buys a 20 megawatt electrolyzer facility will help drive the energy going forward. That's going to be a learning curve for the first 520 megawatts, and then the same will happen on 200 megawatts. And of course, the cost of that total system is higher. We have a roadmap to get to $1.50 a kilo of hydrogen produced with our equipment, and we believe that that's achievable somewhere around 2025 with reasonable volumes through our supply chain. We are very confident in reaching that target. We can do half of this within our own walls and half of it outside. What we do inside is simple things. It's development, it's scale up, it's not technology anymore. We have the base technology. It's going thinner on the metal. When we no longer move the metal manually, we have robots. We can, cut the metal in half and still have a good product. Things like that. Go from round to square, get more out of every, piece of ground you cover. So that's half the improvement. That will be within our factory wall. The other part is on how you put the system together. So one is working with the supply chain. When we order 5 transformers a year, we do not get a very good price. So it's just about scaling supply chain. And last bit is on the engineering. Currently, every hydrogen project is a lot of non-recurrent engineering. You do the drawings site-specifically every time. That drives too much work. So we are investing millions of euros in making standard 3D models with all the technical documentation so that you can copy and paste from project to project. That's why we feel very confident about that target. We don't guide anyone about revenues, profitability, or any other financial targets, but we stick to the $1.50 per kilo because that's something we really, really believe in.
Thank you. Mechthild, 10 million tons a year of renewable hydrogen made in Europe by 2030, and another 10 million tons every year imported from outside of Europe. Are you worried in the Commission you might be creating new import dependencies here? And if you're worried, what are you doing about it?
So I think both are needed in order to agree and reach our overall targets. As I said, it's not only energy security, which is very important. It's the clean energy transition, is the cutting off dependence or the reduction of fossil fuels in general. It's also about energy prices and affordability, which is another very big issue right now. But it's true, if we look at the dependency in the traditional energy sources like oil, gas, and coal, and the situation right now, we got a very tough wake-up call, all our member states. I mean, we speak about energy union since 10 years. A lot has happened. I think also on the gas and electricity infrastructure. In some regions, not enough, Southwest Europe in particular. And there are some bottlenecks right now also in Central Eastern European countries. But I think we had made progress, but not enough. Now, when we go to renewable hydrogen, we need to make sure that there is not a dependence on one supplier. But I don't see that. As I said, we are looking at different regions, very close to Europe, like Ukraine once the war is over, like North Sea, which is very close to a number of here, apart from Portugal, and then also the southern part and the Mediterranean part, which is important. So I think we should make sure that, first of all, we have our own production, and secondly, that we are diversifying where we buy. And I also mentioned Chile already before. So I think this all together will give us very good options to reach these very ambitious targets. And I don't see that there is any risk of creating more dependence, because it's a balanced way of looking what we can produce within the EU, what we can do from different partners outside, and it's also the way of achieving their decarbonization. As I said, it's a beneficial situation. It's not only that we want to get their renewables, we want also to spur in the North Sea or in the Mediterranean countries and in Ukraine, we are already starting it, to see that there is also on the decarbonization pathway we want to go all together.
Just for the sake of clarity, will you be counting Shell Christian's renewable hydrogen as part of the first 10 million or the second 10 million? I mean, what he's producing in Norway and any that may be produced in the UK as well.
Yeah, I think obviously Norway and UK are not in the EU, not anymore in the EU, so it's third parties.
Okay, thank you.
If I may shortly...
It's more tricky if you speak about the offshore when it's a mix of things, but this is definitely...
So if I may just shortly comment, we still feel part of the European family, being part of the European economic area, so we're actually under the same regulation.
We normally say Norway is our 28th energy partner, I think it's, in energy terms, we are very close.
But what I must say, on a comment on that tiny little part, is that one of the things we are really pushing is the Norwegian government, because we are truly disappointed about the lack of progress in our own country. From our perspective, our market is global, and then Norway is a rounding error. And we would, of course, love to have some more success at home to also contribute in this way.
But I think we have a good dialogue, EU-Norway, on all these issues, so we hopefully can help also here.
Catherine, you hinted earlier you might be a bit disappointed with the Irish government as well.
So the ambition that is set out in REPowerEU is exactly where we need to be going as a continent. Unfortunately, Ireland does not yet have a green hydrogen strategy, and it doesn't have any hydrogen strategy. But one benefit of the delay in that is it means that the hydrogen strategy now we can learn from other countries, and it will be a green hydrogen strategy. But my ambition for us as a country is that we are at least as ambitious as the REPowerEU is setting out the bar, and I look forward to working with our MEPs to integrate that down, because why would we wait for something that's at a European level to be pushed down upon us? We should be reaching up to grab it and work with it. There's some of the aspects of it that I just adore on REPowerEU, especially the go-to areas. This idea of saying we'll look at it once and we'll give the energy partners the certainty and the timelines around the permitting, and that gives people confidence to go invest. In Ireland, we've been fantastic at recruiting companies, big tech companies like Google's and TikTok's, and bringing them all into Ireland. We in Ireland need to have the ambition to start treating energy companies like that and bringing them in and encouraging them in. And one of the big disappointments for us last year was to see companies like Equinor leaving the Irish market. But now it's time to flip it and give the certainty to attract them in. The hydrogen strategy that we have will enable a sort of an acceleration of the participation of Irish citizens in the energy transition, because it'll give us opportunities to say, where could we have a local supply chain? So we're never going to be, a big company like Nel inside in Ireland, but there could be some aspect of it that we could do. And I think for us as Europeans, the more our citizens are engaged in the energy transition, the more they're going to be willing to engage with the planning process to allow this kind of development happen. So I think for us at a European level, if we want to gain the social license for our projects, we have to enable more people to feel that it's their energy transition, that it's not something that's being foisted down upon them.
Thank you. Mechthild, it must be great to hear people say they adore your policies. In that context, perhaps I could ask you about the Delegated Act. This proposed definition of renewable hydrogen, how will it facilitate the access that electrolysis needs to renewable electrons to ramp up the necessary scale and speed?
So first of all, one comment, if I may, on the member states, because now REPowerEU is out, and we have to negotiate it within the Renewables Directive and other Fit for 55 or decarbonization of gas with our member states. So even if we propose 45%, it's not yet done. So there's a general message to work also with the member states and national governments who are, they're doing a lot, to be fair, but then there is always the national circumstances and the flexibilities they need. So we need to be clear that we need with Ireland, in a broader context also with Norway, but also with those who are in the EU Energy Council, that we achieve what is in REPower. It's not yet done. We have a great support generally from the European Parliament, but we also need to make it happen with the Council right now. On the Delegated Act of Renewable Hydrogen, additionality. So the main idea is that we incentivize even more renewables, because we all know that we need renewables for the power sector, for the industry sector, for the transport sector, and so on. So we want to make sure that we also incentivize renewables for renewable hydrogen. And the idea of that delegated act, which is, by the way, as you might know, for consultation right now, though there's still until the 17th of June the possibility to discuss it with us. And we published it late on Friday, 19th of May. So there is 4 weeks of consultation. But what we want is, first of all, this additionality criteria, so additional renewables built for renewable hydrogen. Secondly, a temporary, and thirdly, a geographical correlation. So there are 3 kind of conditions to really ramp up the renewable hydrogen and define it as renewable hydrogen. There is a phase-in, because there were a lot of leaks and drafts and comments from different views, industry, stakeholders, NGOs, some member states. So there is, in our proposal, a phase-in basically until 2027, knowing that the new renewable hydrogen market is a nascent market. I mean, it's not yet there. We need really everything with the targets, with the framework, with the finance, with everything we can do to encourage and create the market. And then we want to give the right framework that it's really, after this phase-in, that we really incentivize and have the renewable and have the renewable hydrogen. Hand in hand with that delegated act is really what we are discussing in the RED II in general on the 45% renewables target, with sub-targets for industry and transport, which are, by the way, right now also under strong discussion with the member states. So we have, for the first time, defined binding or proposed binding sub-targets for renewable hydrogen for industry of 50% and for transport of 2.5%, which REPower wants to increase or proposes to co-legislators to increase to 75% and 5%. So this is one other element in that bigger package. And then we have the decarbonization of hydrogen and hydrogen package from 14th of December, which also includes a broader definition of low-carbon hydrogen and a market system till 2030 and after 2030, which we are also right now negotiating. So the Delegated Act is an important element, but it's not the only element. So I invite you to respond to the consultation. First reactions, to be honest, I think are quite encouraging for us, because we get criticism from both times, from different camps. So I think we are not too far, but you are better placed to tell us, and we will obviously work then on a possible revised version. But there's a lot of talks about this Delegated Act, which is really important, but I think it's really part of the bigger package, what we tried to do with the Renewables Directive, the other decarbonization of gas package, and also the strategies and partnerships and the accelerator, which are part of REPower.
Thank you, Mechthild. Sven, what do you think of the Delegated Act? Mechthild seems open to revising it. How would you...
I didn't say in which direction.
Yeah, honestly, there are a couple of points that I'm rather critical about. And let me be clear, I think the intention that you also outlined is obviously the right one. I am concerned that it's actually not going to incentivize or stimulate the build-out of additional green power by these mechanisms, because, I mean, for two reasons. Number one, as we said before, I think the need for acceleration for building out green power is there already anyway. So everybody's trying to do everything as fast as possible anyway. If I then look at the business case for the electrolyzers, I think the Delegated Act will actually worsen things, especially if I take the example of the time correlation. Essentially what that means is that either the electrolyzer will have many hours where it can't run, or you have to oversize massively the wind farms or the PV plants, and even then there will be hours when the electrolyzer can't run. Or you have to co-invest for battery storage in parallel, etc., all of which will just make the green hydrogen a lot more expensive, which, my concern is, it will actually slow down the investment rather than speeding it up. And the second point is, if I look at the grandfathering, and I'm very grateful that it has, from the early leaks of 2025, it has been extended to 2027, which obviously is a step in the right direction. But even that, if you then think about, 2027 from now is almost around the corner, and if after that these restrictions apply, it will slow down what is being built until 2030, and that's where we have just said, well, we want to build a lot of green electrolyzers. So, in my view, what should rather be done is the grandfathering should be extended, and it should be revised, these correlation factors, in particular the time correlation, probably also the areal correlation. So those things I see rather critical. What would I rather see is two things. First, incentivize the use of green hydrogen by carbon contracts for difference or similar elements, but that would be the one that we would argue for in order to stimulate the demand and the pull. We know there is a lot of demand in the industry, but of course the business cases are still very challenging, so stimulating that would be something. And if there is a concern of saying, oh yeah, but if you don't have this correlation anymore, if there is a concern that then actually means that it continues to drive up CO2 emissions in power, I would rather control that through the EU trading scheme, through the ETS scheme, and set the limits there and be strict on those. I think that combination will set the right incentives.
Thank you, Sven. Miguel, what do you think?
Well, it's good to have some difference of opinion. I think I'm more positive about the additionality. I do think it is good to have clarified what was necessary, because to be honest, and just going back also to one of your previous questions, we continue to move forward with the promotion of hydrogen projects. But to be honest, until now, we didn't have a view or any rules really on what consisted of a green hydrogen project, and now at least we know. So I think that's an important step, a very important step, to be honest, which critical step to be able to actually move forward with these projects. So I welcome that, and I welcome that clarity. I think in relation to the grandfathering issues, I think we can also discuss, it's good to clarify, just to make sure that we really understand that there is that right, and that those projects then won't be affected going forward. But I think these are things which will then come out in the public consultation, so I probably wouldn't go too much into detail on that. I understand the issue around additionality. Maybe the only discrepancy I would have in relation to Sven is, I think it would be good to do an impact assessment on, from what I understood of it, the rationale is not to have cross-subsidization between, let's say, the electricity consumers and hydrogen consumers, and sort of to try and manage that balance. So I understand the rationale. I think in practice we'll need to see, obviously, how it happens, but I understand it. One of the key things for me, which will, let's say, follow on now from this delegated act, and which you mentioned a little while ago, is we actually need to create a demand for green hydrogen, because, quite frankly, we are very bullish about it, and not only are we here, but we are promoting projects, but so far there isn't that much demand from industry to actually take up green hydrogen. And I think being able to introduce some of those sub-criteria, defining these rules, is really important to actually get that market going, start defining price, start getting the industrial consumers to actually do that off-taking. But anyway, I think it was an important step. We are positive about it. I'm sure there are adjustments that will be made or should be made, but we're supportive.
Thank you, Miguel. Now, energy, please, Sven, go on.
Let me just make one point. I totally agree, Miguel. The clarity is great, and whatever it will be in the end, in 4 weeks or 5 weeks from now, it will be great to have the clarity. I totally agree with that.
Now, energy security needs strong and resilient supply chains in Europe for all the equipment that we need to make to deliver the transition. Renewables, wind, solar, heat pumps, EV charging points, electrolyzers. How can policymakers help deliver and ensure these strong, resilient supply chains? Kjell Christian, first of all.
Yeah, so if you start with, not only the electrolyzer, because people sometimes tend to forget the whole hydrogen plant. And if you look at the whole hydrogen plant, the electrolyzer might be 10-20% of it all, right? The rest of the scope is very often local by nature. We're talking building, groundwork, civil work, piping, pressure vessels, all things that are relatively easy to scale. When you look at the electrolyzers, there are, you need to take a step back. People say that, this is a proven technology. If today you call 5 different suppliers and ask for an alkaline electrolyzer, you get 5 different solutions. So it's not standard, and you will get different answers from different suppliers, and they will have different dependencies. We are very, very clear that our technology platform is ready to scale. Some others, like the PEM platform that we have in the US, has some issues around iridium, which is a hard-to-get-by material that could potentially limit long-term growth. That's a level of detail we need to go into when you talk about scaling. What for us would be most helpful is the clarity that's talked about here. We have the best line in the world, and it's running at half capacity because our customers aren't placing orders. They want to see the schemes already in the making, like the IPCEI project, like these acts you're talking about, done. So they have the clarity, so they have the rule book, so they know what they can expect. And then we can fill it, and then we can add more. If we are to really accelerate, we can talk about potentially getting some support for building capacity before we have the orders on book. With a long history, and only now starting up from a relatively small base, so in many ways we're the world's oldest startup. We're taking a lot of risk, but speculatively building production facility without some sort of support is not one of them. So that's maybe the one little thing on the edge that we could ask for in addition. But I think the main message from our side is help our customers deliver the projects by just getting the clarity.
Sven, Europe's 5 wind turbine manufacturers are all operating at a loss today, closing factories, shedding jobs. What should policymakers be doing about it?
Yeah, it's actually really a huge concern. And it should be a concern also for green hydrogen, because as we said before, if the wind farms aren't built, then there isn't enough green power. Let me be clear. There are a few elements of the reasons why that are homemade within the supply chain, wind energy supply chain, and that's obviously something I will spare us here because that's something they need to sort out themselves. But there are elements which are crucial because they are driven by external factors, and that is the very high commodity prices and raw material prices, steel, copper, nickel, you name it. And not only have they massively increased, but obviously the outlook is extremely uncertain at the moment. That is an uncertainty that these manufacturers struggle with, in addition to some of the other issues they have seen. And in particular, what we shouldn't forget is when we, as a wind farm developer, ask them for an offer, they need to provide us with an offer for something that they should deliver to us in 3 to 5 years. And that they absolutely struggle with at the moment, because they say, well, look, with that uncertainty of raw material prices, we simply struggle with making you offers and taking that risk. And that is something where policy making comes in and regulatory regime comes in. The most important point is if you have CFDs, these CFDs should be linked to inflation. That exists in some markets like the UK. There are other markets where it doesn't exist or where it currently isn't planned in new legislation. It should be introduced. That's very important because that provides at least a degree of hedge so that the wind energy industry, let me say, that in its wider sense, i.e. the supply chain and ourselves as the developers, that provides us with a certain hedge of saying, yeah, we can work with this uncertainty in the commodity prices. And then there is a second factor, because there is an inconvenient truth in all of this, right? The inconvenient truth is what we have seen in terms of reducing levelized cost of energy from wind energy is not going to continue as we have seen it in recent years. Actually, there might be a short period where we will see increasing cost for wind energy. That brings me to my other regulatory or policy point, which is states shouldn't introduce negative bidding negative bidding in wind energy auctions, because all that does, it adds cost to wind energy, and that is in nobody's interest. It shouldn't be in anybody's interest. All it does is that states take some money, and later on it needs to be earned back, or needs to be paid back ultimately by the consumers of power. So that shouldn't be done.
Thank you, Sven. Catherine.
So we're all here in this room and we're very privileged because we have the education and the experience to understand about hydrogen. But an awful lot of the energy transition is going to affect the citizens and the consumers. One aspect, again, I told you I'm a fan of REPowerEU, is the idea of having a public information campaign in relation to reducing the demand that we place in the energy system. I think our policymakers could have a twofold impact by rolling those kind of information campaigns out as an authoritative voice to talk about the need for green hydrogen in the energy transition. I think that would have twofold benefits. I think it would help our citizens understand what our future energy system would look like, but it would also de-risk some of the difficult decisions that our politicians are going to have to make. Because if they can have the support of their electorate to make difficult decisions because they have a better understanding of the energy transition, I think then we can affect the change that we need to happen. So I think it's important for us to continually remember that the energy transition needs to empower the ordinary person on the street. Otherwise, we're just a group of people talking about something that we all like talking about.
Thank you, Catherine. Miguel, any observations on the supply chain challenges or any other obstacles to the expansion of renewables?
Well, I agree very much with what Sven said. So I do think we need to be mindful of how the supply chain is set up. And one of the worst things that you can do to the supply chain is to stop and go. And this idea that you set ambitious targets and maybe some countries move forward and they stop and then they don't run auctions. And I think this is something which is very simple to solve, quite frankly. We know what the targets are for 2030. We can even predict for 2040. So if you set up regular auctions, and I think both myself and probably Sven as well, at least coming from the renewable side, if you set up auctions, you put in CFDs, these are things that I think the regulators, the public policies, the companies like. And if you run them every year, you run them every semester if you want, and you just give that predictability to the industry, and you just do it. And that sense of, listen, the supply chain includes the development piece as well. And so if you just gave predictability and some regulatory stability, but predictability in terms of what will be done in each of these countries over the next 7.5 years and beyond, I think we can mobilize ourselves, the supply chain can mobilize themselves, everyone can adjust themselves to the volume which is coming. Obviously, we need to improve the permitting, but even for the interconnections, even if you were to tell the network operators, this is what you need to do, incentivize them to do interconnection, incentivize them to allow hybridization, which is something which only happens in some countries, putting together wind, solar, and batteries. I'll just give you one small anecdote, but which I think is important. In Portugal, where you can have hybrids, we competed for an auction for a 70 megawatt interconnection point. We are building 154 megawatts on that point. 70 megawatts of floating solar, 70 megawatts of wind, and 14 megawatts of onshore solar. We're optimizing that interconnection point to the limit. There's a lot of interconnection capacity out there already. If you allowed hybridization, sometimes it's small tweaks in regulation, you could really potentially even double the amount of capacity, renewable capacity, which is out there. So the European Commission has set the goals. I think the national governments need to now give this predictability on what will happen every year between now and 2030. Simplify the permitting, get the interconnection, the supply chain will follow. I have no doubt. You talk to them, as we were just talking about, the factories are not at full capacity. They have the availability. And even though it's costing more, and I agree, the price has gone up compared to the gas price. Maybe you're talking about a PPA price, which has gone from 30 to 35. I mean, quite frankly, if renewables was cheap before, now it's just an order of magnitude cheaper. So quite frankly, that I don't think is an issue or a concern. I mean, reflecting that cost in the PPA price nowadays or in a CFD is absolutely marginal versus where oil and where gas prices are. So I think it's just giving that stability, we can get it done.
Thank you, Miguel. Ladies and gentlemen, in a moment, Philipp Offenberg of Breakthrough Energy is going to make some concluding remarks. But before he does, please thank our excellent panelists.
Yeah, good afternoon, and thank you also very much on behalf of Breakthrough Energy to all our distinguished panelists, and thank you very much for attending today's Renewable Hydrogen Summit. I lead the EU policy program at Breakthrough Energy, and I'm also the person that stands between you and the drinks. So I'm going to keep this relatively short. So all this started a year and a half ago when Breakthrough Energy, Solar Power Europe and Wind Europe got together and said we need to do something on renewable hydrogen. We need to accelerate this technology in Europe. And today we saw over 300 people here discussing the development and the future of this important energy in Europe. We heard from leading CEOs from companies across the value chain. We heard from top policymakers on EU level. And we really have the feeling that renewable hydrogen is now at the center of the European energy debate, be it the climate debate, be it the energy security debate. Just a remark how times have really changed. So when we looked at the sector 2 years ago and when we looked at the EU policy discussion, we all thought the Green Deal was going to be very, very ambitious, everything that the Commission proposed in Fit for 55. We thought almost, well, this might be going too far, maybe this is not realistic. And now it's just the baseline, really, of what we're discussing. Yeah? So we've seen the European Council imposing an oil import ban yesterday. We have, of course, seen REPowerEU with massive increase of ambition for renewables, for renewable hydrogen, and in many other sectors. So this is really all going in a very, very promising direction. But to conclude this from our side is now is really the time to deliver, and we see a lot of promising developments, but we still have a very long way to go. I think we talked about the costs. Our internal assumption on this that right now we see a cost of $4 per kilogram of green hydrogen, but we really need to get this to $1 per kilogram, and good to see that Nell is already envisioning the $1.5 per kilo. Today I think the message from the industry is ready to deliver on all of this, but we still need the right policy support, and everything has been said. I took notes today, all the boxes were ticked. I think what is really important now, the Commission has made the right proposals in many areas. Mechthild and others in other departments have proposed good things, but the next weeks and months will be really crucial to get this all across the finish line. And let me just reiterate my top four. We need an enabling definition of renewable hydrogen. We need to streamline permitting, it was said many times. Of course, the industry and transport target for renewable hydrogen, but also for derived e-fuels is really crucial and needs to be at an ambitious level. And finally, of course, fast and simple access to support instruments. So these are the homeworks for the Commission, for the co-legislators for the next weeks and months. And we all, as the Renewable Hydrogen Coalition and all partners, will of course do everything in their power to support those who are pushing for progressive outcomes here. Finally, Breakthrough Energy wouldn't be Breakthrough Energy if I wasn't talking about innovation today. So there are still areas, and we shouldn't forget that, where we also need to innovate when it comes to renewable hydrogen. Yeah? It's one thing to build an electrolyzer, it's something else to really have the right technologies for storage and transport of hydrogen. So this is also something that we should keep our focus on in the coming years to really deliver on our visions. Very last thing that remains to be done here is to thank the team. So most importantly, François Paquet, the Impact Director of the Renewable Hydrogen Coalition. Where is he? Is hiding. And then his team, Amaya Skelton and Anna Momotova, who have made all this here possible, who have set up this coalition and organized this fantastic summit. So I want everyone to give them a big round of applause, please. And then you are all invited. You saw it probably in the program. There's a high-level cocktail reception. I was told everyone here is high level, so please everyone show up. You're all very kindly invited. Thank you again for coming today, and yeah, hope to see you at the bar in a few minutes.